Hi, everyone. Welcome to Adventures Live 2021. My name is Famia Nkansa, and this is the panel on emotional intelligence and sexual consent and rape culture. And so I'm here with three very cool people, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Okay. Hello, my name is Amwafwa, and I'm a content creator and a teacher as well.
Hi, I'm Ari, computer scientist and a general nerd.
Hello, so I'm Michaela and very interested in safe spaces, being in them and contributing to the creation of them.
So we're talking about emotional intelligence and consent and what the two have to do with each other, and basically how we do a better job at preventing or improving rape culture, right? And so I wanted to ask you guys, what experiences have you had with consent? What has been your general journey with consent over the course of your sexual life? Ari, do you want to start?
Yeah.
Please, tell me.
I would say probably one of my early introductions to the idea of consent, oddly enough, and it's not sexual, I promise, was I think when I was in class 4. It'd been happening for a while, but I had a bully who kept taking my water without asking. Yeah, it was very annoying because I like my bottle and I like my bottles, but he just kept taking my bottle, and it was very annoying. And I have an issue with just not being able to say, "Hey, stop that," because it's stressful. It's a lot of stress to just stop a thing, especially while it's happening, especially when you don't understand it. But how I remember that sort of ending was when, at a point in about class 4, I just got upset and exploded on him. Stop taking my bottle. Stop drinking my water. And it was like, oh, you're making a scene, but no, I needed my water to stop. And after that, it just stopped. It's odd, I guess, in the sense. I mean, it's probably how I feel like that's consent is just because the idea of ask before you do something, check that everything you do regarding anybody's property or themselves or anything in general concerning a person and their autonomy, check first. He didn't check, and that stressed me out until I told him to stop, because that was what was stressing me out. So yeah, I'd say that's probably like my early introduction to the idea of consent, and from there it just builds on, because even though one isn't necessarily introduced to the theory or this explicit idea of consent very early, we learn it right from the beginning of our lives, that because we have autonomy, we have ourselves, and there's people around us, and we're constantly in interaction. And because we're constantly in interaction, we always have to do that thing of checking first with each other. So I'd say that's my my history with consent. Yeah.
That's an interesting way to think about it. Because you're right, it does start from everything, but then I think we only think about it in a sexual context.
Because it costs a lot there.
Because the stakes are higher in a sexual context, right? But then if you've gone your whole life never having given consent for things that keep happening, then how do you advocate for it in a sexual context? Like if you've gone your whole life with people pushing you around and people taking things from you, people doing things to you don't like, the first time a guy does it, do you suddenly find the courage to be like, no, nigga, no?
And if you've always taken somebody's bottle without asking, is
What's
it really
different
that
from a boob? Yeah.
Is it really that different?
Yeah.
And that's how I guess it happens to a lot of people on either side. We don't check first.
I had never thought about that. What's been your experience? Oh, go.
I suppose it's fine. It's now or never, or at a point. So I suppose my favorite experience, and I use favorite in not exactly a positive way, just like I find a lot of experiences interesting in very mundane ways, and I like to use words in mundane ways. So my favorite experience with consent, and it happens to actually be a pretty good one, is that so there was this guy I liked. I thought he was really, really cute, and then all of a sudden, somehow, seemingly with no effort on my own, we happened to be in the same space, and it was a very intimate and cozy space. So we just cuddled like throughout the whole period, which was nice. So I was like off the high of like having been in such an intimate space with someone I liked, and then I texted him. I mean, no, he texted me. I got a text from him, and he was asking if it was okay that we cuddled because he didn't ask then, and neither did I. We just got to that point somehow. And that would it be okay if it would continue? That if we were constantly in the same space again under similar circumstances, would that be fine? And I just thought it was really sweet because it was past and it was gone. And I realized then, and I realize now that even though I didn't have an issue with it then, I could have had an issue with it if I didn't like him. But then, us having left that space, then I didn't expect him to. It's gone. It's old news. Why are we talking about it again? So it was very interesting, and it's my favorite, like on a personal level, that happened in the order that it happened. Even though it's not the ideal order, but then we still had that conversation. So yeah.
It's nice he checked.
Yeah, nice
it
guy.
was.
Nice guy. Is he still single? You should put his number on the platform or something. Guys like that should be circulated.
I think I have thoughts, and I'm going to try to string them together in a way that makes sense. So I think for a long time, I didn't really think about consent, like sexual consent, at least, like actively, because I don't know if I believed that I needed to give it. I think, because there's so many things that I remember of just like feeling like because my body existed, it would be touched. And I wasn't sure if I was allowed to say no to that. Because I think like there's a lot of messaging around like women's bodies. Like if your body looks a certain way, if your skin is a certain color, if you like act a certain way, if other people have treated you a certain way in the past, you kind of internalize that you just kind of will be touched by people without being asked. So I think I felt about myself that like people will touch you and you just kind of like move on with it. And I don't know when I started to realize that I had a choice in the matter. But yeah, I think I kind of internalized a lot of messaging that if you like looked a certain type of way or like you like to dress a certain type of way, you kind of deserved people touching you without asking.
Like you had given silent consent.
Yeah,
like
it's like
de
kind
facto
of like,
consent.
yeah, just like because you are, people can touch you. Like I remember, like freshman year of college, this is so random, but like I like the like midsection of my body, and I never wear bras or anything like that. So I was always wearing like really tiny tops, and I was like always half naked walking around. It's summer, it's hot. Nobody wants to be wearing clothes. But I remember I was like talking to a friend, and he was talking about how like a bunch of other guys that we were friends with would talk about like my like nipples showing through shirts all the time. And like if we went out, like somebody would like try to touch me, and they just kind of thought it was fine. Mm-hmm. And I also kind of felt like
It's the default.
yeah.
Did you feel like if you were wearing different clothes, it wouldn't have happened? Or did you feel like, they would have found a way to do it anyway?
So it was both about the way I dressed and also just about my body in general. So I kind of felt like even if I was wearing shirts and pants,
Given that it's a default state, it's not
Yeah.
something to intentionally pay attention to.
yeah, I just kind of figured it would happen anyway. It's unfortunate, but
Do you think this stuff is cultural? Because what you're saying reminds me of the first time there was a carnival in town. I think it was in Osu. And there was like the first carnival in Accra, and I didn't go. And a friend of mine went, and she was telling me about it. And she said, "Oh, the music was very nice, but I had a horrible time." And I was like, "Really?" And she was like, "Yeah, next year when I go, I'm wearing trousers. Like I was wearing like a skirt, but I wasn't too short. But this one girl, she was wearing a skirt. It was so short. They fingered her until she cried." And she said it like it's just a thing. Like, "Oh, child, why did you wear short skirts? Did you not know you would be fingered till you cried?" Like, it was just like, that's just part of the experience of carnival. I'll go next year, but I'll wear different clothes, you know? And I think that culturally, part of it is just being Ghanaian and being from Africa and being black and all of these layered sort of levels of isms and oppressions on top of each other. But I don't think you feel like you have a ton of right to your own body. Because I remember I got boobs at like 7. And from the time I've had boobs, aunties have been squeezing my boobs. You know, it's like, oh, look, you've grown. Oh, look, they are big.
Why
Hey,
did they
now
do
they are
that? It was
watermelons.
so cute.
And like, these are adult women in my family, right? So the first time an adult male sort of grabbed my boob, I was perplexed, but I didn't have that sort of indignation that comes from the shock of feeling violated, you know?
You knew it was different, but the action matched things that you felt before, so it didn't really click as a problem
Yeah.
immediately, which is very familiar. I think I'm glad you brought up family and culture because in my experience, the world is very confusing, and I think if you, like I said, even like with the bottle and how you said you hadn't thought about it, there's a lot of other things that we take for granted in general, and it's, I guess the simplest reason is that for some things, it's quicker to just assume because you can say, given the scenario, given that we're all generally the same, we can assume that certain things would be okay within certain things. Like say, for example, even talking to somebody, you don't ask before you actually begin a conversation with somebody, but then it's implied in the beginning of the conversation that, can we have this conversation? And you could say it's all right in that sense because sure, why not? There's a lot of things that we give up to that. But how culture then leads into it is that what we decide our defaults then get layered and put into the idea of this is the culture. So if it was like a manual, this is the manual, this is what we've said is normalized. But then the issue with culture is who then defines it? Who's the definer? And family is probably one of the earliest places anybody, in fact, it is, hopefully. Sorry if it's not, but it is the earliest place where you begin to learn these things. That when you get information, this is what happens, this is how you deal with things. And if the people around you are layering on different things as part of what is default, even if you have a physical reaction to it, that in your mind, you at some point you would say something isn't right with this, because it fits with all the other like smoothing curves and everything that we use to just default everything, it doesn't click immediately. And by those, and again, it comes down to who then defines the culture. And here we are in a, say with me, patriarchy with the everything. And so when those people then decide, I want to add this to the culture and I have the power to add this to the culture because this culture says I have the power to add this to the culture, it doesn't click very early for many people until they intentionally pay attention and say, wait, there is a reason why this feels funny. And it's because we come back to the first thing, which is intentional personal autonomy. It's not something that I am comfortable with. And that's the first thing that I feel within our culture and within many other cultures, not just even the African culture, we don't express or state that the first thing you must know is you are yours. Beyond that, everybody else has to check and pay attention.
Preach.
We don't do that part first. We just skip to the, well, we're all here, everything is fine, and the circle just keeps expanding around the things that's our default, which is unfortunate, and which is why we're now here, closing the circle back to the person, because I feel a culture is better when you have individuals who are themselves intentionally participating and not just participating by default in what has been decided already. Okay.
I like that point, that intersection of personal autonomy and culture, because even before he went, as she spoke, that thought process was very recurrent in my mind. And it's very interesting because from very early on, you're some uncle's wife.
Yeah, somebody's daughter.
Exactly. And someone's sister. Even before you get to become actual things that you are, like someone's aunt or someone's mother. But then you have all these uncles and aunties and just people generally at family meetings and in very safe spaces in your homes calling you or referring to you as a Nana who is not even born yet and might not be born for all we know's wife. So you just grow up not expecting to be yourself. And then as you get older, there's be careful so that your husband will, or you should be in the kitchen so that you can cook for your children. There's always that inference upon yourself, and it's used to dictate how you move and the things you're interested in and the things that you want to do. So it just like really ties in here, and it's interesting to see.
Your personal definition before you know it is defined by others first, your relationship to others. which is unfortunate because in that scenario, it's implied that, oh yeah, obviously you exist,
Yeah.
but you exist as, and we forget the part about this is you first, and just skip to the as, which is, well, unfortunate. But here we are.
I don't know, the part about the skirts really got to me. Like, it got me thinking. Because there's this story that my mother used to tell, or that she still tells it, about like a friend of hers that was at Medina Markets. And there was a girl there. This was like back in the day when, like, I mean, Penn still has, it's like whatever. But they were like, she was a Penn's girl. She was walking around Medina in like small, like denim shorts. And then like a bunch of men were following her and like yelling threats at her. They're like, why was she dressed like that? And it was my mother's friend who came to tell us the story, and then my mother went on to tell it. But when she was telling us the story, she was like, and this girl that she was wearing these small shorts and walking around Medina, what do you think will happen to you? And that she had to like run and stop some Trotsky mates and jump on the Trotsky so that she could be safe from the men. But everybody in the car was insulting her for wearing tiny shorts. And it was like a cautionary tale that like, don't wear short shorts outside.
That's not the problem.
Yeah, but like that's not the problem. We live in a country that's like fucking 40 degrees Celsius. Like, please wear shorts.
Absolutely.
And people should not. It makes it sound as if she was wearing longer clothes, people would have respected her. But that we know that doesn't happen anyway. But yeah, it just made me remember that story and how a lot of it becomes about teaching at least young women to blame themselves for the way that men violate them. And it starts from so young, because I remember that story and I was like pretty young. I never wore shorts as a child. If I was wearing a dress outside and like somebody's father called me, it was like, oh, it's the dress I'm wearing. That's why this man is calling me. And so then I need to fix that versus maybe adult men should not be chasing 12-year-olds.
What about that? What a novel idea.
Just perhaps.
Yeah. But so the conditioning of blaming yourself for being violated starts very early, I think. It's just
And
what that made me think
I feel a lot of that comes, it's like when you start with defining people by their relationship to others, and then you expand that out to the wider society, you know, it's you versus the rest. And there's the impression that, yes, we are absolutely in charge of all our actions. But then when the actions are external and when some things are taken as default in the society, then it looks like, okay, well, if that's default here, we don't change these values here, what happened here? Why was yours different? It doesn't happen to everybody else. Let's look for why it happened to you, which is the problem. Forgetting that, well, it wasn't so much why it happened to you. You aren't the issue. It happened. And you're forgetting the part where if I'm supposed to be in charge of the clothes I wear, they're supposed to be in charge of where their hands go. Why don't you pay attention to that then? Why don't we then look at who does the first action? Why did you do that? Why do you think that's okay to do? Why? We don't ask why enough. But never mind.
No, there are not enough whys. I think it's just because default in our country, and not just in our country, in the world, there's this sense of entitlement that men have to women's bodies, right? And also there's this sense that sex is something that men take and women either give or get it taken from them. But essentially, sex isn't a transaction, sex isn't a conversation, sex isn't some sort of mutual exchange. Men are taking it, and your duty is either to give it willingly or to not do things that will make them take it. But then the things that will make them take it is such a nebulous category, because women get raped
existing.
in skirts up to here. Children get raped. Babies get raped. What were they wearing? Ooh, that onesie. So provocative. Like, it's not about... Consent is basically just about the fact that men feel entitled to take things from people that they see as weaker than them, smaller than them, less powerful than them. And in order to have some sense of safety or control about it, we make all these rules about what you can do to prevent stuff from being taken from you. But the truth is there are no rules. No matter what you do, no matter what you wear, you could end up in a situation where something happens without your consent, you know? And so the issue isn't that somehow something causes your consent to be denied, or your consent to be taken from you, or your autonomy or your agency to be taken from you. Like, the reality is just that people suck.
By default.
By default.
It's just the only default.
So we were talking about this earlier. Basically, how sometimes you don't even realize your consent has been violated because you don't know that something makes you uncomfortable until after it's happened. So I was telling you guys about the unwilling and uncomfortable hand job that I was forced to give in the dining room of Achimota School a long time ago. And how basically I didn't realize that it wasn't consensual until years later when I talked to my college boyfriend about it, and how quick he was to see that the fact that somebody had put my hand on their dick and forced me to touch it was not okay. And how I at the time had just been concerned with, what if someone sees me touching a dick in the dining hall, and why is this dick so small? And so one of the things that we were talking about, or one of the things this comes back to, is at what point do you develop the emotional intelligence to know that something is uncomfortable? At what point do you realize that something is non-consensual if you haven't been able to figure out what makes you comfortable and what doesn't?
And that's a very interesting intersection between all of our learning and all of our growing up, because it's in the process of growing up and from when we're really little that we learned everything that we know, that we develop emotional intelligence and regular intelligence. So, yeah, if as you've been growing up, all the information that you've got, all the cues that you've learned, all the ways of life in which you've been imbibed with, did not come to a place which involved knowing yourself, and that knowing you exist as a singular person, and that you have choices and desires and feelings which are as valid as everybody else's. Because it's very often a situation that on the value chain, our personal choices and our personal interests are quite like way below that of everybody else. So then you have this long history of not considering yourself as anything, as worth the trial, the struggle, or
The
like
wahala.
Yes, the wahala of even figuring yourself out to know that I like this, I do not like this, I do not feel comfortable in this situation, and so I should stop. Or on the flip side of things, or that I should ask if the other person is feeling comfortable or wants this to continue, because you've been primed and trained to want to please. And that's the funny bit, because we always look at pleasure as based from the collective point of view of what has been said is pleasure. At that moment, we should be asking what is pleasure to myself and to the other person, but then we often don't do that.
I feel we forget that in every interaction, there are at least two agents, the other person and yourself.
Yeah.
But a lot of what we end up learning from just observation and what we're told is that when there's a point that you need to think about something, always consider the other. And by itself, that's a fair statement, because if you're you, it's assumed that, okay, you should know you at least. So the other thing that you don't know is the other. So when you're doing something or thinking about something or want to do something, consider the other perspective or the other person. But how doesn't that become completed is that we forget to keep telling the person that no, you still need to know you first. You still need to know what's important to you, what's valuable to you. And I guess there's a reason why, because, in our society and through time, we've seen that there are examples of people who have done some bad things, and one of the common lines is that they only thought about themselves. So we said, since we know that, consider the others. But we forget that you still have to actually think about yourself and what's important to you, and that you are a self that needs to be involved actively involved in the participation of what's going on. It's an interaction between you and somebody else. The interaction will happen, and you will be put in that interaction, and whatever your state is at that point will be the state that you basically take into the interaction. So if you don't check what that is first, and then check what somebody else is, well, of course, then that's a lot of space for mistakes, especially if they're also doing the same thing, that they haven't thought about themselves, and then they're coming. How that is destructive in its own way is that, yes, there's people who, did bad things because they only compiled for themselves. But there's also people who did bad things because they forgot to compile for themselves. They forgot that they were a self as well that was going to do something, that was going to react to their own internal states. They're going to do something. If you don't know where the thing you're doing is coming from, how do you know that whether or not it's good or bad? Whether or not you should be doing it in this scenario? You might start doing a thing, not realize that you're doing the thing. The thing has happened, and now you're uncomfortable because something has changed, and you forget again to check. Was it me? What was my role in this? And then you end up projecting the result of that because you feel uncomfortable. Well, I'm me. That's fine. You're the problem. You're what's different here. And I feel like that's how then society, when you add that up through all of social interaction and all the rules and things that we tell ourselves, that's where we get that sensation that, well, if you got harmed, it must have been because of you. If everybody's using that sort of thought process of it can't be the thing, and a person is doing the thing, and we forget, it's uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. And that's, I guess, where then the emotional intelligence comes in, that a necessary factor is yourself, but not in the sense that you must only optimize for your interest, but that you must know what that self is going into the interaction so that you don't make a mistake based on things that you haven't paid attention to or haven't addressed.
Like listening to you say that, it's very interesting because there's, I don't know if you guys listen to Sincerely Accra. But he has this one episode where there was a guy who had written in and he was talking about like wanting to be married or something. And Joseph was saying like it's rites of passage that is killing Ghanaians because you kind of are just doing things because you do them. And I think it's really interesting, like thinking about that a lot of the time you're in relationships with people where they're like three-way things. So it's your relationship with culture or like larger society that you're just kind of playing out with other people. So it's not very intentional.
It's a script.
Yeah,
And you're just following
exactly. You're following a script. And
Because
so
what else have you been taught?
yeah, there's not very much space for what do I think of this script? Do I agree with this script? Does this script make me feel good? Does this script make the other person feel good? You're like, so in like a sexual situation, if you're the person who is traditionally like the more masculine person, so you like traditionally have more of the power in the situation, you're just playing out what a script of a sexual interaction looks like without necessarily thinking about whether this is something that I actually want to be happening or the other person wants to be happening. And I think maybe like an awareness of how we kind of default to scripts in situations that are new, situations that are uncomfortable, would like tie in the emotional intelligence bit. It's just being aware that there is a thing that's bigger than you that's happening here. And also of like how you yourself are feeling in doing that thing, I guess. Yeah.
I like how your thought process mentioned intentional because I guess that's the differing bit between being emotionally intelligent in situations like this or not. Because when you're not intentional about your actions and you're not intentional about your intentions, it's very easy for you to just do things without thinking through them and analyzing them for whether positively or negatively for what it's worth. You just do them. And like you said, like very rightly said, when you just do things, you don't realize the implications it might have, even if not for your own self, because also we have this perception of prioritizing everybody else. But then when you're going through things in the script form, you don't even do that at this point. You just do it, and then sometimes it hurts people.
And so, let me start here. For context, so I have ADHD, and one of the main tells of ADHD is poor emotional regulation, which, to be fair, fine, it's true. Well, in a sense, and I'll get to that. It's just the emotions I regulate. That's point is, I've had to do a lot of that. Check yourself because, unfortunately, like just growing up, I was different. And because I was just a bit different, it means that I would rub against what others think a lot more. And because I had to rub against those things a lot more, I had to now say, oh, okay, well, these are things that I should be checking a lot in myself. Now, that's its own headache and its own internal things. But the good thing of what it does is the more you interact with things and the more like you get feedback alternate to what you believe, the more you have a chance to learn, the more opportunities you have to learn. That is basically the whole point of learning. Learning is not just memorization or anything. It's that, is this thing I believe true? Do I even know this thing? Go and check. What is the information that was there? How does the information differ from what I knew? And it's that last part, that how does it differ? That is necessary, which I think, first of all, a lot more people need to do. But why I think, the perspective that brings for me is that intentionality is a lot of work. And so it's not so much that there's something bad inherently with a script, because a lot of, we wouldn't know anything if somebody hadn't written it down for us to go and read. And then now we know it. And because we know it and hopefully have gone to make sure that it's true, we're better off for it. This is, I believe, the benevolent intent of social structure. It's meant to be, well, we know that you're going to have trouble figuring this out on your own. Don't worry. You're only 0. How could you figure this out on your own for how many years that you're going to be here? So as you come along, we'll let you know what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done. That in itself is a good thing. That's, let's help the other who doesn't know. But then we forget that we also might not know. We forget that there's things that we haven't considered. And that ends up happening, especially when a lot of what you deal with has already been written. And so you're like, oh, okay, well, fine. And if you're operating within those parameters, you should be fine. You can just default to the information. You don't need to check for a lot of things. And that comes back to my statement on how what is then decided as default keeps growing and keeps changing. And it's like, okay, we take these as a default. So it's like, in your mind, it makes sense when you don't know something to default to what you've been told. It makes sense to, in fact, not even it doesn't have to be when it doesn't make sense, because it's like, it's cheaper in the end. It's cheaper just to do what you feel. And it's not so much that you might not be aware of yourself, because in the end, whether you like it or not, you are aware of yourself. That's a very thing that we need to realize, that we're constantly aware of ourselves, because that's the only thing that we know. Everything else is just how we perceive it in our minds, and it continues from there. But the problem then is, the real issue isn't so much that you aren't feeling or that you aren't aware of yourself, is that you're not checking what that awareness is telling you.
I think that that's where it comes from. Like, it's because I would have said that we lack self-awareness, but I think you're making a decent point there. People are aware of themselves. They just haven't processed what that means. Because I think that a large part, going back to the script thing, of sex is that once people feel like once you get into the situation where sex is going to happen, or into a situation where there's mutual attraction, or into a situation where you feel as if there must be mutual attraction, everybody is basically following a set of cues, right? And those cues don't get examined for personal affinity. Like, does this work for me? Does this not work for me? It's just, this is the cue, this is the cue, this is the cue. And so even for men who you would think of as the aggressor in sexual relationships, there's a whole lot of sex men have that they don't like. Just
Yes.
because they think that that's the sex that they're supposed to have, right? I've had, like, I remember the last ex-boyfriend, one of the first times we hooked up, we were hanging out and we were doing something, and he sort of made a move like, yo, and I was like, you don't want to have sex. Like, you just want to hold me. Like, so come hold me. Like, that's, like, it's not the chopping that is, like, that's not your driving force right now.
You
It's
just want
that-
to be held. You just want
Yeah,
cuddles.
you just
And it's
want
okay to want cuddles.
But like for you, the cuddles happen after sex. So you want to chop me so you can get the cuddles. You don't need to chop me. Like, let's just cuddle. But I think that that's definitely something that a lot of people don't do the work to check in with themselves for.
Because
And
it's
it's
hard.
because, well, it's also because, like, your whole life, everybody has suppressed every instinct. You have to do that work. Because if you really did that work, you would realize at a very early age that things suck and you have to advocate for yourself. So yeah, the thing African society or society at large is most allergic to is self-advocacy. Because once we know ourselves, we can fight for our rights and we can say this makes us uncomfortable, and that makes other people uncomfortable. So because we're not advocating for ourselves, we end up following these sexual scripts which are detrimental to us, which don't help anybody in the end.
I had a friend who told me the story about how it was really interesting to hear, because I guess it was like a crossover that I hadn't really thought about, that he was interested in somebody, and I don't know, for maybe like it's a heterosexual man thing where if you are interested in a woman or you're like emotionally connected to a woman, you assume it has to be sexual. And so he didn't actually want to have sex with this person. But because the script is kind of like man meets woman, there's an emotional connection, ergo sex, he couldn't think of it any other way apart from like having sex with this person.
God damn it. Gotta fuck her now. And
Yeah, and so it was just like an interesting.
and to be fair,
it's true.
I can understand where that would come from. Not so much that it's happened to me, but like, you know, I obviously being a man, I've been through the same, sort of been expressed like the same kind of things, and it's like, okay, you have feelings for person, according to the script and everything that we know about feelings, as far as we're concerned, is if we feel this thing, and I don't know what that feeling is, and I default to the thing that I know, well, I should probably be doing this. It's not always, and to be fair, just it's not like it's a universal thing. In different, depending on how the people you grew up with emphasize what, you know, different things would have different values, and probably. But one of those things that I've noticed is that there's a very high value placed on, well, now you gotta fuck her, and not even so much like right from that early point, it's like, oh, I like her, now I got to this. But even in the moments when you are having a sexual interaction, if you're not as either in tune with yourself and what you want, or even probably just as importantly, I wouldn't say more important, but just as importantly, also in reverse, is as in tune with what the other person actually wants, you end up making the calculation that, okay, well, that means I need to do this, even if it doesn't feel the best, even if it doesn't feel right. Because, again, who wants to be the dude that didn't?
Who wants to be the dude that had like chopping in front of him, like pussy available, and you didn't? Like, how do you explain that to your friends? Like, how do you go back to
and even
the guy museum and go and say what?
And what's worse is, like, even if you have no intention of going back to the guys, because I didn't grow up like feeling so attached to speaking to men, but it gets compiled that you effectively end up internalizing that
it.
conversation
Yeah.
with yourself. You feel that sort of negative, your own
Yeah,
bros.
your own
You end up
bros.
feeling like I ended up. So I'll speak for myself specifically. I ended up feeling a lot of, well, not a lot, hopefully, thankfully, but in some situations there was quite a bit of internal pressure that said, well, the next action that's meant to happen is this thing, but I don't necessarily want to do this thing. But like, am I really going to be the dude that says no to this? And part of that also is not just coming from like the boy said do this, but then also your impression of what she might feel
Yes.
in that moment. It's a
Yes.
very expensive thing, and it's not so. I'm not assuming that every woman in that scenario would react the way that we're led to believe they'd react, but we're led to believe that they would react in that scenario. They'd call out your man, or they'd call out, you know, you're this, and all that leads back to how we just need to just talk to each other and make that in the moment. There's a feeling that I don't quite understand. There are things that I might not be comfortable with. There's a discomfort in this moment. And that's where I feel emotional intelligence plays the most powerful role. Recognizing that discomfort, recognizing where it's coming from, what is causing that discomfort, and bringing it up so that we can talk about it in a safe way. If we're able to do that internal discussion with us, first with ourselves, by asking what is it that is the issue that I feel, bringing that up with others, that, okay, this is the issue that I feel here. I don't actually feel like doing this right now. What I'd really like is that we just cuddle. We just look at each other. Because sometimes you just want to look at each other. And that's fine. And then, even if the reaction isn't so much what you expect or is exactly as you expected it would go, bringing it up is better for you in that position because at least you brought it up. It will
But see, that's the problem, though. I mean, I think that you've nailed it, because at the end of the day, like when people ask what prevents rape culture, what helps, it's conversation, right? But people are highly afraid of conversations around sex. Like if you notice, a lot of the stuff people do sexually, and the whole idea of implicit consent, like, oh, I've done this, I've kissed him, so now I have to let him touch my boob. Oh, I've let him touch my boob. So now how do I say don't touch my waist? Oh, child, he's at the waist. Now how do I say don't grab my butt? Oh, child, he's at the butt. Come on, I might as well. You know, and it's this sort of layer thing. And if at every point of that there was some kind of conversation, or even in the beginning there was a conversation, a lot of that gets allayed. But people find it extremely difficult to look someone else in the eye and talk about sexual desire, sexual pleasure, boundaries. Is not a conversation anybody wants to have.
It's very uncomfortable.
It's very daunting for a lot of people, and not just men, women too. Like, I know women who talk about the fact that, like, you have a freak factor, you have the stuff you'll do, but you don't do it in the beginning, right? Because you don't want him to ask you questions like, hey, where did you learn that? Hey, what position is that? So you start like gentle. You start with the basic skills, and then after you're in a relationship, then you can bring out the Mortal Kombat moves, like the finish him. But like,
So
you
basically, you'd like to open with the
You want
fuck
to-
freak shit.
yeah, but you don't, because you have some sort of dissatisfying sex for like 2-3 months or whatever, and then you feel like you've gotten close to him, he kind of understands things, and then you can drop the freak stuff one, and then I think the assumption is sort of that then he can assume that you learned it with him, that you guys sort of grew together in the sexual experience, right? But if you come with it at the beginning, then he has to face the fact that you've been with other people. And for a lot of women, that is extremely stigmatizing. And for a lot of men, that is extremely anxiety inducing. How many people has she been with? Did she like them? Were their dicks bigger? Did they do this? So I think people want to avoid that conversation altogether. And women find that it's easiest to just not be too sexual and that allows you to avoid that conversation. Because at the end of the day, people don't want to have honest conversations.
I don't know. That made me think about something when you were saying that, because it's like, I guess my mind always goes to the like, where are the like power dynamics and like power imbalances in the situation? Because I feel like if you are a woman having sex with a man and like he shows up and he seems like he knows what he's doing, your immediate thought isn't, damn, he's a whore, all of these things. You're probably appreciative of the fact that he knows what he's doing. But then when it's a woman, you kind of like, it's like almost like the Madonna whore thing, where you present yourself as like a saint, because if you are not the saint, you lose like you lose human value.
You lose social capital, yeah.
Not even
Within
social
the system.
capital, like in the man's mind now, you're afraid that you will just be a whore. And that being a whore also means that you are no longer a real person. And so if you want like a real relationship with this person, you can't also be a whore. That needs to come like 2 years later when you're like sure
When
that
you get the ring.
yeah, when you're sure that they respect you and like they see your humanity, then you can also be
So-
somebody who enjoys sex. Which like, yeah, I think a lot of cultures talk a lot about sex. I think Ghanaians in like on the radio.
Oh boy.
Ghanaians talk about
We
sex
talk about
all
sex,
the time.
but not to the people we're fucking.
True.
We have conversations about sex, but we don't talk to the people
We
are
have the
having
conversation
sex
before
with.
with other
and
people.
after.
We have it after with other people.
But not
in the
with the
moment, we're
person.
just having sex.
This and what she said right before that is just very reflective of how we constantly reinforce the script. It's like the script is this. Some people can see that there are breakages in it or it's not all that perfect. But then the larger group of people, we keep picking the script up for 1 year and then moving to the next. And then just like making sure that the binding of it is still intact. Even though like we don't like the story, but then we keep
Preserve the book.
preserving it and moving it across and like transferring it to the next generation.
Because we value that more than our own ability to reason in the moment.
Exactly.
I'd like to ask a question as representing my brothers. So you mean to tell me that if we respect women right from the beginning, we can get the freak shit?
Absolutely.
God damn it. God damn it.
My freak shit exponentially grows with respect.
But that's the thing though, is that like even with like I guess the conversation about consent in general, the reason why it is such a big conversation is that you come into like a sexual space, you have the masked person who is the like aggressor figure, then you have the like femme person who is like typically the like I guess more submissive figure, and
Per the script.
per the script. And then in that dynamic, the other person again loses like subjectivity. You become an object, and you also almost participate in it because you also objectify yourself.
Yep.
Because when he was saying that thing about how like a man, like you're like your own bros in your head when the situation is happening, you also have the woman on the other end of it being like, I also need to expect aggression from this person and want aggression from this person. And I don't remember where I was going with that, but I don't know. The absence of subjectivity when the other person, the like masked person, is looking at you as the like more femme person. I just think that that's an interesting space.
So I'd say this is where especially the concept of consent and emotional intelligence really play in. Because the issue here isn't so much that these things are true. It's that we don't know that they're true or not. And we're basing our follow-up actions based on the information that we have, which is this conception. Consent would help because it says, is this true? Can I just check? Are you the person that I'm currently afraid of in my mind? And because of that, I believe I have to do this. But also on the internal side, this is the thing that makes me feel uncomfortable. And I recognize that this is the thing that makes me feel uncomfortable. This is the thing that I would need to address in this scenario. Hence, you go to check that thing. So I think emotional intelligence allows you to first see within yourself what it is that's causing the contention in the moment. And consent allows you to open the conversation with the person and continue from there.
So there's this thing, let me ask you this. Because when people talk about consent, one of the things that people say is it's not sexy, right? Because one thing about consent is it's not just implicit, there's continued consent. So people say, well, I mean, I can ask like, Charlie, do you want to chop? But then at every point, do I have to ask like, is it okay if I do this? Can I go down on you now? Is it like, Charlie, it's plenty. And people feel like that makes the situation less sexy because we've been somehow conditioned to equate sexiness with this lack of conversation, right? We've been raised to think of the conversation as like an interruption as opposed to part of the sexiness of the sex, right? And do you feel like that's a thing? Do you feel like having active discussions about consent makes things less sexy? Or have you had people tell you that?
It is a very almost common saying or sentiment among many people. And I suppose that's because, and I almost hate to use the word script again, because that is the script. We have been conditioned, and we know that doesn't mean it's right, but then we know that sex should not involve conversation. It's the action, and then we're done. And so having all these conversations come in, just the thought of it is very threatening to the whole process. But then that's where if we have lots of conversations about consent and we have had and we have learned, and it's a part of our upbringing and of our growth, then we don't think of sex as just the action, because consent has become a part of the conversation, a part of the whole process from the very beginning. It's become a process from like when you saw the person across the room. So it's all imbibed, it's interweaved and interwebbed into the whole process. And then also about emotional intelligence here is that because you've been doing these things for a very long time and it's become a part of your psyche for so long, you are able to more easily, or rather, okay, let's just go more easily. You're able to more easily see the tails of it. You're able to more easily weave it into the conversation. You're able to more easily understand that this action is, you know yourself by at this point. So then you know that I do not like this action. Would they like this action? Should I continue? Maybe we should stop. And also then it allows you, this comes back to the story that Amofa shared earlier about how lots of people equate liking someone simply to sex. But then once we've had this rewrite on the script, this new guide with which we've grown with, you realize that there are more other things. There are so many things we can do that is a part of our intimacy.
There are so many different ways to like someone.
Exactly.
As you were saying that, I was just thinking, like, you know, all the movie scenes where like they see each other across the room, it's like Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and then they're like like breaking down the door. They
Yeah.
can't wait to go inside, and like there's no point
There's
at
no
any there
conversation.
anybody's talking about
eye
anything. Yeah, you're just like, literally
Just
eye
vibes.
contact
Just
and vibes. I think something that I kind of like learned to do is to try to set intentions for sexual experiences and just like have a conversation prior. It doesn't have to be like a whole, it's just like, what do you want from this? Like, how do you feel? I think sometimes maybe if you're not used to having conversations about how you feel in general, it starts to feel more daunting. But I don't think it needs to be anything that's like too much. You can tailor it to wherever it is that you are emotionally at that point in time, and like, yeah. But setting intentions for your experiences, I think, like, is a good way to approach adding in emotional intelligence.
Oh, it's interesting. I tried to debrief. Like my ex and I had just had sex, and I tried to debrief, and he was horrified. He was like, we finished shopping. What do you want to talk about? And I was like,
How good it was, maybe?
seriously, I was like, I was about to give you compliments. I was about to gas you up. But I think that's really sort of like the issue. Like you were saying, you have to reflect. And I really think that for me, it goes back to the conversation again, that people don't realize that the conversation can be part of the sex, that the conversation can be part of the interaction. It doesn't even need to be, may I kindly touch your breast, madam? Like, it could just be as simple as, does this feel good? Do you want me to keep going? Like, was that the move? It's about paying attention and being in touch with yourself so you can be in touch with the other person. And I really think that's the answer for rape culture. Men need to stop thinking of it like a conquest, and people need to have a conversation so they're being honest about their desires and the other person's desires.
Yeah, I think, honestly, the best thing in any situation, like even going back to one of my first interactions, which was the bottle, is if you find yourself in a position where either you don't know something or you don't know how you feel, or you feel a certain way and you're not entirely sure, the best thing is always to just stop, take a breath, and listen to yourself than to what the other person is also saying. Because you get more information that way. You can learn more. You can confirm whether or not what you're basing your feelings and your actions on are true. Be certain in that part of it, so you know you don't have to think about that anymore, and focus more on what you don't know, or what you can't think about, which in that moment can be the interaction that you're having. So I feel probably the best thing anybody can do to apply emotional intelligence in their, not just in their sexual lives, but especially their pleas, but also just in general. Just stop, check, listen. You'll feel much better after. Yeah.
I think in terms of the like debriefing thing, I think it's really important. Because again, like what you were saying, you're building a bank of information. And I think what we're saying about conversations is also that you don't ask enough questions when things are done. You're just trying to like, it happened, it's over, moving on to the next thing. So you're never learning that maybe if somebody like moves in a certain way, that might be a cue for me to like ask them if this is comfortable or not. Or if I feel a certain way doing something, I should be questioning that. And then I know that that's something I can question in my next interaction. So I think, debriefing, asking yourself questions, post experiences, it just helps you build up a bank of information that you can take into other things.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to add that sometimes it's not just about asking yourselves that question, because we've said conversation a lot in this conversation. Yeah.
No
But
pun
then-
intended.
So, none at all. But then I just wanted to state that conversation goes two ways, and that we must be intentional about each of the ways the conversation goes, with ourselves and with our partner. Sometimes it's not the same partner, but then having the conversation with one informs how you're going to relate with the other in one way or another. So, yeah.
And also, I believe to even be able to know that this is something you need to do, you have to have a value for emotion in the first place.
Absolutely.
Emotions aren't just information you can throw away. It's not just a rounding error. It's important. It's your body telling you something. It's computed information that's come in and it's giving you a result. You're feeling a thing. It came from somewhere. pay attention to it, listen to it, you will learn more and you will feel better after.
Booyah. I think that's absolutely. I agree. Cosign.
Yeah.
Anyways, we're going to have to go now. It was wonderful to talk to all of you. More stuff is coming on Adventures Live 2021.
Yay.
So please stay tuned and take care.